Darius Kane stood amid the smoldering skeleton of his Chicago penthouse, ashes dusting his gray suit, as firefighters battled the last flickers of flame on a chilly March evening in 2025. Shards of his shredded U.S. passport glinted. In the wreckage, a silent scream of his name. A news anchor's voice cut through. It all spiraled from one flight attendant's choice at O'Hare yesterday. She didn't know who he'd become. How did a single tear ignite this chaos? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. And if you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe for more stories that roar. Picture this. Yesterday afternoon at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, the air buzzed with that frantic hum of travelers hauling suitcases, slurping overpriced coffee, and dodging each other like bumper cars. Gate C-19 sat nestled, in the chaos, a boarding line snaking past a flickering neon sign for pretzels. Darius Kane moved through it all, a 42-year-old black man with a presence that didn't shout, but still turned heads. His gray suit hugged his broad frame, not flashy, just crisp, the kind of tailoring that whispered money without screaming it. He wasn't rushing, no earbuds drowning out the world, just a steady stride toward his flight to Seattle. A leather satchel slung over one shoulder, his mind already on the board meeting waiting 3 hours west. Then he saw her, Rosa Alvarez, a tiny Latina woman, maybe 75, perched in a battered wheelchair near the gate's edge. Her hands, knotted with arthritis, fumbled toward a luggage cart where her faded floral bag teetered half on, half off, threatening to spill socks and prayer beads across the scuffed floor. People streamed by, eyes glued to phones, pretending she was a ghost. Not Darius. He stopped, knees bending slightly as he leaned in close enough to catch the faint lavender scent clinging to her scarf. "Let me help you, ma'am," he said, voice low and warm, like a friend she hadn't met yet. No grand gesture, no look-at-me swagger, just two steady hands lifting that bag, securing it on the cart with a gentle nudge. Rosa's eyes, cloudy, with age, lit up like he'd handed her the moon. She grabbed his wrist, frail fingers trembling, and rasped, "Bless you, hijo. Bless you." Darius gave her a small nod, a flicker of a smile tugging at his lips, then straightened his jacket, brushing a crease flat as if it was nothing. He turned toward the gate, ready to blend back into the crowd, but that quiet act of kindness was about to crack his world wide open. The air shifted, thickened, like someone had flipped a switch from bustle to menace. Enter Karen Voss, 50-something, white, with a blonde bob so stiff it could have doubled as a helmet. She stood behind the counter, her navy uniform starched to perfection, radiating the kind of energy that screamed she'd alphabetize her sock drawer and brag about it. Her pale blue eyes locked on Darius the second he stepped into her line of sight, and they didn't soften. They narrowed, sharp and cold, like she'd caught a thief red-handed instead of a guy who'd just helped an old lady. He didn't fit. Her script didn't match the polished travelers she waved through with tight-lipped smiles. Too calm, too composed, too black in a space she'd decided he didn't belong. Darius approached the counter, pulling his boarding pass and passport from his satchel, movement smooth and deliberate. He handed them over, meeting her gaze with that same steady look he'd given Rosa, a look that said he'd seen this dance before and wasn't fazed. Karen snatched the documents, her manicured nails clicking against the plastic cover of his passport. She flipped it open, then froze, her lips pursing into a thin, sour line. The passport wasn't new, edges worn from years of travel, stamps bleeding into each other from cities she'd never see. To her, it wasn't proof of a life lived. It was suspect. "This looks old," she snapped, voice slicing through the hum of the terminal like a shard of glass. Darius tilted his head, just a fraction. "It's valid," he said, calm as still water. Her eyes flicked up, then back down, and a smirk curled her mouth, slow and nasty, the kind that telegraphed she was winding up for a fight she'd already won in her head. "You sure this is yours?" she asked, dragging the words out, savoring them like a bitter candy. He blinked once, the only crack in his composure. "Excuse me?" Karen leaned forward, elbows on the counter, her smirk widening into something venomous. "This passport looks altered," she said, loud enough for the guy in the baseball cap 3 people back to perk up. "Sir, I think this is fraudulent." The word hit the air like a slap, and the line behind Darius shifted, a ripple of whispers and sideways glances spreading fast. Someone coughed, another pulled out a phone because nothing feeds a crowd like a brewing scene. Darius straightened, shoulders squaring, his voice still even but laced with steel now. "That passport is valid. Check it." But Karen wasn't here for checks, wasn't here for reason. She was here for power, and she'd already decided he didn't deserve it. Her fingers tightened around the blue booklet, and then, with a flick of her wrists, she ripped it clean in two. The sound echoed, a sharp tear that silenced the whispers and froze the line. Pieces fluttered to the counter like dead leaves, his name, his photo, his citizenship shredded in front of 20 strangers. Gasps punched through the stillness, real ones, raw and jagged. A woman clutching a toddler's hand flinched. The guy in the cap dropped his pretzel, jaw slack. Darius stepped back, eyes wide, not with fear but with a stunned fury that flickered behind his calm. "What the hell are you doing?" he said, voice rising just enough to carry. "That's a federal document." Karen didn't blink, didn't flinch, just crossed her arms and tilted her chin up, smug as a cat with a canary. "Step aside," she barked, sharp and final. "You're not boarding this flight." And right then, like they'd been waiting in the wings, 2 security guards pushed through the crowd, boots thudding on the tile. Big guys, white, with buzz cuts and holsters that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. They didn't pause, didn't ask, just zeroed in on Darius like he was a bullseye. "Sir, come with us," the taller one grunted, hand hovering near his radio, official but cold, the kind of tone that didn't invite questions. Darius held his ground, palms up, slow and deliberate. "I haven't done anything," he said, each word measured, heavy. "That woman just destroyed my passport for no reason." Karen leaned forward, her smirk twisting into something theatrical, almost gleeful. "He got aggressive," she said, voice pitching higher, loud enough for the guards to hear. "I didn't feel safe." The lie landed like a brick, and the guards didn't even glance her way, didn't check her story. The shorter one stepped closer, meaty hand brushing Darius's elbow, a warning wrapped in a grip. "Let's go," he said, firmer now, and the crowd parted, phones rising like vultures circling a kill. Darius's hands twitched, not from nerves, but from the restraint it took to keep them still, to not give them the explosion they wanted. He'd been here before, knew the trap. Stay quiet, and they bury you. Fight back, and they bury you deeper. So he moved, slow and stiff, letting them herd him toward a side corridor, Karen's smug little nod burning into his back. The gate faded behind him, but this wasn't the end, not even close. It was the spark that lit a fuse nobody saw coming, least of all her. Darius Kane sat on a metal bench in a stark holding room off O'Hare's main terminal, the kind of place that smelled like stale sweat and burned-out dreams. The walls were a dull gray, scratched with initials from folks who'd been here before, and a single bulb buzzed overhead, casting shadows that danced across his gray suit, now wrinkled from the security guard's rough hands. His satchel rested beside him, untouched, a silent witness to the chaos that had just unfolded at Gate C-19. Across the room, a TSA agent named Mike slouched in a plastic chair, his uniform sagging like his enthusiasm. Mid-30s, white, with a patchy beard and eyes that screamed he'd rather be anywhere else. Mike tapped at a clipboard, barely glancing up. "So," he drawled, voice flat as a tire after a blowout, "you say this passport was real?" Darius leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze steady but simmering. "It was real," he said, each word deliberate like he was laying bricks to build a wall of truth. "That flight attendant, Karen Voss, tore it up for no reason. Check the system. My name's Darius Kane, flight to Seattle, first class." Mike sighed, a long, theatrical exhale, and scribbled something on his clipboard, probably doodling a stick figure instead of doing his job. Yeah, we'll see," he muttered. But his tone said he'd already checked out, ready to stamp troublemaker on Darius's file and call it a day. Outside, the terminal churned on, oblivious, but something was brewing beyond those concrete walls, something Darius couldn't hear yet. Then it hit, quiet at first like a ripple before a tsunami. A kid in a hoodie, maybe 18, had been in line behind Darius when Karen ripped that passport to shreds. He'd pulled out his phone, shaky hands capturing every second. Karen's smirk, the tear, the guard swooping in like hawks on a mouse. Now that clip was live on TikTok, a 90-second bomb titled, "Racist Flight Attendant Goes Off at O'Hare." By the time Darius sat in that holding room, it had racked up 50,000 views, then 100,000, hashtags popping like fireworks. Justice for Darius. O'Hare racism. Karen strikes again. Comments flooded in. This is disgusting. He was just standing there, and she needs to be fired yesterday. The video showed Darius's calm, Karen's venom, and the guard's blind rush, clear as daylight through a clean window. Back in the room, Mike's radio crackled, a supervisor's voice cutting through static. "We've got a problem. Gate footage is out. Check the guy in holding." Mike's brow furrowed, the first sign of life in his bored face. He stood, lumbering to a corner monitor, and punched in a code. Grainy black and white footage flickered to life. There was Darius, handing over his passport, polite as a preacher on Sunday. There was Karen, sneering, ripping it apart, her lie about him lunging nowhere to be seen. Mike scratched his neck, muttering, "Well, damn." Darius watched him, silent, letting the truth do the talking. Minutes ticked by, each one heavier than the last, until Mike tossed his clipboard on the desk with a thud. "All right, Kane," he said grudgingly, like it pained him to admit he was wrong. "Looks like you're clear. Sorry about, you know." He waved a hand, vague and dismissive, as if a shredded passport and a racist takedown were just a paperwork mix-up. Darius stood, smoothing his suit, his jaw tight but his eyes blazing with a fire he kept leashed. "Appreciate it," he said, voice cool, clipped, the kind of tone that hid a volcano beneath it. Mike handed him a temporary boarding pass, scribbled on like a kid's homework, and pointed him back to the gate. Darius grabbed his satchel and walked out, shoulders squared, head high, the buzz of the terminal swallowing him up again. Gate C-19 loomed ahead, quieter now. The line thinned out, Rosa's wheelchair gone. Karen stood behind the counter, her blonde bob still stiff, but her face twitched, lips pursed like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. She didn't look at him, didn't dare, as he handed over the temp pass. The scanner beeped green, and he stepped onto the jetway, the cool, metal echoing under his shoes. He settled into his first-class seat, a plush leather throne near the front, and exhaled, long and slow. The plane's engines hummed, a low growl promising escape. For a moment he let himself think it was over, that he'd dodged the bullet, that the viral clip had shamed Karen into backing off. A faint smile curved his lips, a rare crack in his armor, as the flight attendant, not Karen, offered him a glass of water. He took it, sipped, and leaned back, the Seattle skyline already flickering in his mind. But here's the kicker. While Darius sipped that water 30,000 feet below, Karen Voss wasn't done. Oh no, she was fuming, her pride a raw, bleeding wound after that TikTok blew up. Back at the gate, she hunched over a computer, fingers stabbing at keys, her eyes darting like a cornered animal's. She pulled up the airline's internal system, found Darius's name, and with a vicious little twist of her mouth, added it to the no-fly list. No reason, no evidence, just spite, pure and unfiltered. "Let's see him smile now," she hissed under her breath, hitting enter with a jab that could have cracked the keyboard. The screen flashed, Darius Kane, restricted. She leaned back, arms crossed, a smug glow settling over her like she'd just won a war nobody else knew was raging. Up in the air, Darius had no clue, no hint that this wasn't the end, that the bullet he thought he'd dodged was still spinning, aimed right at his back. The plane soared west, cutting through clouds, but down below, the fuse kept burning, hotter, faster, ready to blow his world apart all over again. "Hey you, with me? This is where it gets wild. What do you think? Should Karen face the heat for that TikTok takedown, or is she just getting started? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you think Darius deserves justice already, or a number 2 if you're betting Karen's got more venom up her sleeve. Smash that like button if you're raging at this system screwing him over. And subscribe if you're ready to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Share this with anyone who's ever been judged for just existing, because Darius's fight, it's only heating up. So what's next? Will landing in Seattle bring him peace, or is something uglier waiting on the tarmac? The plane touched down in Seattle just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the tarmac in streaks of orange and gray, a fleeting calm that Darius Kane soaked in through the oval window of his first-class seat. The flight had been smooth. 3 hours of quiet where he'd let his shoulders ease, his mind drifting from the chaos at O'Hare to the board meeting ahead. He adjusted his gray suit, still creased from the guard's grip, and slung his leather satchel over his shoulder, stepping off the jetway into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The terminal hummed with a softer energy than Chicago's mad rush, travelers wheeling bags toward exits, their voices a low murmur against the clink of coffee cups. Darius moved with purpose, his polished shoes clicking on the tile, headed for the sliding glass doors that promised fresh air and a rental car to get him downtown. He was almost there, 10 feet from freedom, when the air shifted, turned heavy, like a storm rolling in without a cloud in sight. 2 cops loomed ahead, blocking the exit, their navy uniforms stretched tight over barrel chests, faces hard and pale under the fluorescent glare. Big guys, both white, with buzzed hair and eyes that didn't blink, didn't waver, just locked on him like he was prey they'd been tracking all day. "Stop right there," the taller one barked, voice rough as gravel, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered gun, casual but loaded with intent. His name tag read Officer Daniels, etched in silver that caught the light. The shorter one, Officer Reese, stepped to the side, boxing Darius in, his meaty fingers flexing like he was itching to use them. Travelers slowed, heads turning, a ripple of curiosity spreading through the crowd, but nobody stopped. Nobody spoke up. Darius froze, mid-stride, his satchel bumping his hip as he raised both hands slow and empty, a reflex carved into him from years of knowing how this game played out. "What's the problem?" he asked, voice steady, though his pulse kicked up, a drumbeat he couldn't quiet. Daniels smirked, a thin, crooked twist of his lips, and tilted his head like he was sizing up a stray dog. "You're Darius Kane, right?" he said, not a question, a statement, like he'd already decided the answer. Darius nodded once, careful. "Yeah, that's me. Just landed from Chicago. What's this about?" Reese snorted, a sharp huff, and crossed his arms, his biceps bulging against his sleeves. "We got a call," he said, slow and deliberate, savoring the weight of it. "Passenger on a no-fly list flagged for aggressive behavior. Says you're a flight risk. Step over here." Darius's jaw tightened, a flicker of heat flashing behind his calm, but he kept it locked down, his face a mask of control. "That's a mistake," he said, each word clipped, precise. "I just flew in. Cleared security at O'Hare after an incident with a flight attendant. Checked the system." Daniels didn't move, didn't flinch, just leaned in closer, his breath sour, with coffee and stale gum. "We don't need to check anything," he growled, voice dropping low, menacing. "You're coming with us." Before Darius could argue, Reese grabbed his elbow, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise, yanking him toward a side corridor off the terminal. The crowd parted, some gawking, others hurrying away, but a few phones popped up, lenses glinting like vulture eyes. Darius stumbled, then caught his footing, his satchel swinging as they hauled him past a Starbucks. The barista's wide-eyed stare, the last thing he saw before the corridor swallowed him up. "This is wrong," he said, louder now, twisting, to face Daniels. "I've got rights. Call your supervisor." Daniels laughed, a short, ugly bark, and shoved him forward. "Rights?" he mocked, his tone dripping venom. "Stay in your lane, boy. You don't get to tell us what to do." The slur wasn't loud, but it landed like a fist, raw and deliberate, a knife twist of racism that echoed off the concrete walls. They shoved him into a squad car parked just outside, the cold metal of the door slamming shut behind him with a thud that rattled his bones. Handcuffs snapped around his wrists, biting into his skin, tight enough to leave red welts he'd feel for days. The leather seat stank of sweat and cheap cleaner, and through the scratched window he saw travelers gape, then look away as the car peeled out, tires squealing on wet pavement. Inside, Daniels drove, knuckles white on the wheel, while Reese twisted in the passenger seat, glaring back at Darius like he was a trophy they'd bagged. "Heard you caused a scene in Chicago," Reese said, smirking, his voice a taunt. "Threatening. Staff, huh? Lucky we caught you before you tried it here." Darius met his eyes in the rear view, unflinching, his voice steady despite the cuffs cutting deeper with every bump. "That's a lie," he said. "A flight attendant tore my passport, made up a story. It's on video. Check it." Daniels chuckled, low and dark, his eyes flicking to the mirror. "Video don't mean squat," he said. "You're on the list. That's all we need." The car swerved onto a side street, away from the airport's glow, the city blurring into shadows as Darius's mind raced, piecing it together. Karen. That smug little nod at the gate, her fingers on that keyboard. This wasn't random, wasn't a glitch. It was her, striking back, her spite reaching across states to clamp these cuffs on his wrists. The precinct loomed ahead. A squat brick building with flickering lights and a chain-link fence curling around it like a cage. They dragged him out, boots splashing in a puddle, and marched him through a side door into a booking room that reeked of bleach and despair. A desk sergeant, gray-haired and bored, barely looked up as Daniels tossed Darius's satchel onto the counter. "Caught. Him at SeaTac," Daniels said, smug as a kid showing off a shiny rock. "No-fly violation, aggressive behavior, lock him up." The sergeant grunted, typing slow, while Darius stood there, cuffs chafing, his suit jacket torn at the sleeve from Reese's grip. "I need a phone call," he said, firm, cutting through the room's stale air. Daniels spun, face twisting, into a snarl, but the sergeant waved a hand, lazy, like swatting a fly. "Give him his call," he muttered, already back to his screen. Reese uncuffed one wrist, just enough to let Darius dial, and handed him a grimy phone, the cord tangled like a noose. He punched in a number, quick and sure, his lawyer's voice crackling through after 2 rings. "Elise, it's Darius," he said, low, urgent. "Seattle cops grabbed me. No-fly list, fake charges. Get me out." Elise didn't waste breath, her tone all business. "Sit tight. I'm on it." The line clicked dead, and Reese yanked the phone back, snapping the cuff back on, tighter this time, a petty little jab that made Darius wince. They shoved him toward a holding cell, but out in the terminal, those phones hadn't stopped rolling. Clips hit Twitter now. "Cops cuff black guy at SeaTac for nothing." Views climbed, comments raged. But inside that precinct, Darius sat alone on a bench, the cold seeping through his suit, his breath steady, but his mind blazing. Karen's revenge had landed, hard and fast, turning a torn passport into a jail cell 300 miles away. He flexed his hands, the cuffs clinking, and stared at the bars, knowing this wasn't the end, not by a long shot. She'd swung, and she'd hit, but the game was still on, and the next move was his. The Seattle precinct's holding cell was a concrete box, barely 10 feet square, with a bench bolted to the wall and a flickering light that buzzed like a trapped wasp. Darius Kane sat there, his gray suit now a map of creases and tears. The cuffs still biting into his wrists, leaving raw red rings he'd carry like badges. The air stank of mildew and desperation, a faint echo of shouts bouncing from down the hall where other detainees rattled their bars. His satchel sat on the floor, unzipped, its contents untouched since the cops had tossed it there after dragging him in from SeaTac. Across from him, behind a scratched metal desk, sat Detective Hargrove, a wiry white guy in his 40s with a buzz cut and a smirk that curled like smoke. His badge gleamed under the dim bulb, but his eyes were dull, predatory, flicking over Darius like he was a puzzle he'd already solved. "So, Kane," Hargrove said, leaning back in his chair, voice slick with mock curiosity. "You're a real troublemaker, huh? Chicago now here. What's your deal?" Darius didn't flinch, just met his gaze, steady as stone. "My deal," he said, slow and firm, "is I'm a businessman who got harassed by a flight attendant, and now I'm sitting here for no reason. Check my record, it's clean." Hargrove chuckled, a low, grating sound, and tapped a pen against the desk. Rhythmic, taunting. "Clean, huh? We'll see about that." He stood, stretching like a cat after a nap, and sauntered to a corner where Darius's satchel lay. With a theatrical flourish, he reached in, rummaging past a notebook and a pen, then froze, his smirk widening into something feral. Well, he said, pulling out a small plastic bag, clear and bulging with white powder, holding it up like a prize. Found these on you, Kane. Looks like cocaine to me. Darius's stomach dropped, a cold jolt slicing through his calm, but his face stayed hard, unyielding. That's not mine, he said, voice rising, sharp now. You planted that. I've been in cuffs since the airport. You think I'm carrying drugs through security? Hargrove tilted his head, feigning surprise, then tossed the bag onto the desk with a soft thud. Planted? That's a bold claim, he said, smirking. Wider. But see, I don't think anyone's gonna buy that from a guy like you. The guy like you hung in the air, thick with venom. A racial jab so blatant it stung like a slap. Darius leaned forward, cuffs clinking, his eyes burning into Hargrove's. You're framing me, he said, each syllable a hammer strike. And I'll prove it. Hargrove laughed again, louder, leaning close enough for Darius to smell the tobacco on his breath. Good luck with that, he sneered, then turned to a filing cabinet, scribbling notes to seal the lie into official ink. But this wasn't random, wasn't some rogue cop's whim. Hargrove had a connection, a thread tying him back to Chicago, to Karen Voss. Her brother, Eddie Voss, was a beat cop in Seattle, a hulking guy with a chip on his shoulder and a hatred for black men who dared to rise above what he thought they deserved. Eddie had gotten the call from Karen after she'd slapped Darius on the no-fly list, her voice hissing through the phone. He humiliated me, Ed. Make him pay. Eddie had grinned, called in a favor with Hargrove, a buddy from academy days who owed him one after a bar fight cover-up years back. The plan was simple. Plant the drugs, lock Darius up, let the system grind him down. No passport, no freedom, just a cell and a rap sheet to bury him. Hargrove didn't care about the why, just the how, and he played his part like a pro, snapping photos of the bag next to Darius's satchel, evidence that it'd stick in court unless someone tore it apart. Darius watched him, mind racing, knowing he was trapped in a web spun from spite 300 miles away, but he wasn't done yet. He'd called Elise, his lawyer, and she was his lifeline, a shark in a suit who'd shred this setup if he could just hold on. Time crawled, the cell's chill seeping into his bones, until the door creaked open, slow and heavy. A janitor shuffled in, an older black man with gray stubble and a limp, pushing a mop bucket that sloshed water onto the floor. His name tag, Red Clarence, pinned crooked on his faded blue jumpsuit. Hargrove barely glanced up, barking, "Hurry it up, old man," before stepping out to grab a coffee, leaving the door ajar. Clarence mopped, slow and deliberate, his eyes flicking to Darius, then to the desk where the planted bag sat. Darius caught his look, a silent question passing between them, and Clarence nodded, just a twitch, before pulling a cracked flip phone from his pocket. He angled it, quick and sly, snapping a blurry shot of Hargrove slipping back in, the bag still in view, the frame job caught in pixels. "Keep your head up, son," Clarence whispered, voice rough as sandpaper, then shuffled, out, the bucket's wheels squeaking a farewell. Hargrove didn't notice, too busy smirking at his handiwork, but that photo was a spark, a crack in the wall he didn't see coming. An hour later, the cell door banged open again, and Elise strode in, a 40-year-old black woman in a tailored, red blazer, her heels clicking like gunfire on the concrete. Her braids were pulled tight, her eyes sharp enough to cut glass, and she carried a tablet glowing with purpose. "Hargrove," she snapped, not waiting for him to speak. "You're done. Release my client now." Hargrove spun, startled, his smirk faltering. "What the hell are you talking about?" he growled. But Elise shoved the tablet under his nose, a video playing, Clarence's shaky footage time-stamped, showing the bag appearing after Darius was cuffed. Hargrove's smug grin as he staged it. "This hit the precinct's tip line 10 minutes ago," she said, voice ice cold. "You're caught. Drop the charges, or I'll bury you in court." Hargrove's face drained white, his hands balling into fists, but he knew he was cooked. He muttered a curse, yanked a key from his belt and uncuffed Darius, shoving him toward Elise. "Get out," he spat, but the venom was hollow. A loser's last gasp. Darius rubbed his wrists, wincing at the welts, and grabbed his satchel, following Elise out into the precinct's flickering hallway. Outside, the night air hit him like a slap, crisp and wet with Seattle rain, the precinct's lights fading behind them as Elise led him to her black SUV. "You're free," she said, a rare softness in her tone. "But this isn't over. Whoever's behind this, they're not stopping." Darius nodded, climbing into the passenger seat, his jaw tight, his mind already turning. He'd won, hadn't he? Beaten the frame up, walked out breathing, the planted drugs exposed as a lie. He let himself exhale, a long, slow breath, the tension easing as the SUV rolled onto the highway, city lights smearing past the window. For a moment, he thought he'd turned the tide, that Karen's swing had missed, that he could get to that board meeting and reclaim his day. But then, as the car slowed at a stoplight, a brick sailed through the air, shattering the driver's side window in a spray of glass. It thudded onto the seat, a jagged slur scratched into its surface. "Go back where you came from." Elise cursed, swerving, while Darius stared at it, blood roaring in his ears. Karen's web wasn't cut. It was growing, and this was just the next thread, sharper, uglier, promising worse to come. Darius Kane stepped out of Elise's black SUV, glass crunching under his shoes as the Seattle rain pelted his torn gray suit, soaking through to his skin. The brick with its jagged slur lay on the seat behind him, a silent taunt glowing under the streetlight's flicker, but he didn't look back. He'd made it to Chicago by dawn, a red-eye flight that landed him at Midway instead of O'Hare, his nerves still raw from the precinct cell and that shattering window. The city sprawled gray and wet, a late March chill biting through the air. As he hailed a cab to his office, a sleek glass tower downtown where he ran a logistics firm, nobody knew was just a front for something bigger. He needed normalcy, a reset. So he climbed the 20 floors to his corner suite, the skyline stretching out beyond floor-to-ceiling windows like a promise he'd fought to keep. But when he pushed the door open, that promise shattered. His desk, a polished slab of oak, was a battlefield of chaos, papers shredded, drawers yanked out, and across the surface in dripping red spray paint sprawled the words, "Get out and nigh." The stench of aerosol stung his nose, and his chair, leather and custom, lay slashed, stuffing spilling like guts onto the hardwood. Pictures of his late parents framed in silver were smashed, glass glinting like tears on the floor. Darius stood frozen, his satchel slipping from his shoulder, thudding soft against the chaos, his breath catching as the violation sank in deep. This wasn't random, wasn't some punk kid with a can of paint. He crossed to his laptop, still intact, on a side table and booted it up, fingers trembling not from fear but from a fury he could barely leash. A quick search pulled up the truth. Karen Voss had escalated her war. After slapping him on the no-fly list, she'd dug into his life, found his name tied to this office, and posted it on a far-right forum called Pure Patriots, a cesspool of hate with 10,000 followers itching for a target. Her post screamed in all caps, "Darius Kane, thug who attacked me at O'Hare, works here, teach him a lesson." She'd attached a grainy photo from that TikTok clip, his face clear as day, and the replies had exploded. "Time to clean house. He doesn't belong in our city. Burn it down." The timestamp showed she'd posted it hours after he'd boarded for Seattle, right when her spite had festered into something feral. Darius scrolled, jaw tight, as the threats piled up, each one uglier than the last, until he slammed the laptop shut, the click echoing in the ruined room. He called building security, voice low and clipped. "Get up here, now." A guard, a skinny white kid named Tim, arrived panting, his flashlight shaking as he surveyed the mess. "Holy crap, Mr. Kane," Tim stammered. "I'll call the cops." Darius nodded, but his gut twisted, knowing cops hadn't exactly been his allies lately. Minutes later, 2 officers arrived, a black woman named Powell and her white partner, Ortiz, both in crisp blue uniforms, their boots leaving wet prints on the floor. Powell's eyes narrowed at the slur, her lips pressing thin, while Ortiz snapped photos, muttering, This is bad. Darius stood by the window, arms crossed, recounting the O'Hare incident, the no-fly list, the precinct frame-up, and now, this. It's connected, he said, voice steady but edged with steel. Karen Voss, flight attendant. She's behind it. Powell scribbled notes, nodding slow, while Ortiz radioed for a detective. We'll pull the forum post, Powell said, her tone firm. And dust for prints. You got cameras? Darius pointed to a discreet lens above the door, its red light steady. Yeah, check it. The cops left to review footage, and for a moment, he let himself breathe, thinking maybe this time the system would work. That, Karen's hate had overreached. But then dusk fell, and he headed to his car in the underground garage, a sleek black sedan parked near the exit ramp, its chrome glinting under sodium lights. He slid his key fob across the lock, the beep sharp, in the quiet, when a shadow lunged from behind a pillar, fast and silent. A masked figure, broad and hulking, loomed in a black hoodie, eyes glinting through ragged holes cut in the fabric. A knife flashed in his gloved hand, 6 inches of steel catching the light as he charged, snarling, "You don't belong here! Scum!" Darius dropped his satchel, instinct kicking in, and sidestepped as the blade sliced air inches from his chest. His heart slammed, adrenaline flooding hot and fast, but he'd trained for this, years of boxing in his youth snapping back like muscle memory. The attacker swung again, wild, and Darius ducked, then drove a fist into the guy's gut, a solid thud that doubled him over with a grunt. The knife clattered to the concrete, spinning away, and Darius grabbed the man's arm, twisting it hard until bones creaked, pinning him face down. "Who sent you?" he growled, knee pressing into the guy's spine. But the thug just wheezed, mask-muffling curses. Headlights flared as a security truck roared up, Tim leaping out with a taser drawn, shouting, "Freeze!" Darius stepped back, chest heaving, as Tim cuffed the guy, dragging him toward the elevator. "Got him, Mr. Kane," Tim panted. "Cops are coming back." Darius nodded, wiping sweat from his brow, his suit now streaked with grime. The knife, gleaming on the ground like a trophy. He'd won, hadn't he? Disarmed the bastard, survived the night. He drove home, knuckles white on the wheel, the sedan's engine purring as he cut through Chicago's neon-lit streets, the tower's lights fading in his rear view. The thug was in custody, the forum post flagged, his office a crime scene under watch. For a fleeting second, he let relief seep in, a tight coil in his chest unwinding as he pulled into his building's lot, the penthouse waiting 20 floors up. He parked, stepped out, and took 3 steps toward the lobby when a faint whiff of gasoline hit his nose, sharp and wrong. His eyes flicked to a shadow near the dumpster, a figure slipping away, then to a glint of orange flickering under his car. Too late, he turned, and the world erupted, a fireball swallowing the sedan in a roar of heat and metal, the blast knocking him flat, ears ringing as glass rained down. Smoke choked the air, thick and black, and through it, he saw the note, taped to the dumpster, flapping in the wind. "Next time you burn too." Karen's hate group wasn't done, not by a mile, and this wasn't just terror anymore, it was war. Okay, folks, let's unpack this insanity. Does Darius deserve a break after dodging that knife, or is the system too stacked against him to ever let up? Comment number 1 if you're screaming for justice to finally swing his way, or number 2 if you think Karen's crew has more hell to unleash. Hit that like button if this attack has you boiling, and subscribe if you're riding this roller coaster with us, because Darius's fight is far from over. Share this with anyone who's felt the weight of hate, because this story's about to ignite. So, what's lurking in the flames? Will the ashes bury him, or light his path to strike back? Darius Kane stumbled through the parking lot of his Chicago high-rise, the acrid sting of gasoline and charred rubber clawing at his throat, as the fireball that had swallowed his sedan roared behind him, a beast of orange and black devouring metal. The blast's heat singed his gray suit, now a tattered shroud streaked with sweat and grime, and his ears rang with a high-pitched whine, drowning out the distant wail of sirens cutting through the late March night. Shards of glass glittered on the asphalt, reflecting the inferno like a shattered mirror, and that note, "Next time you burn too," flapped on the dumpster, its edges curling in the wind, a promise written in hate. He coughed, lungs burning, and staggered toward the lobby, his polished shoes crunching debris, his mind a storm of rage and disbelief. This wasn't just a car, not just a warning. This was Karen Voss's war hitting his doorstep, her far-right goons turning spite into flames. He'd barely caught his breath from the garage knife fight, barely processed the slur on his office desk, and now this, a sucker punch that left him reeling but not broken. He pushed through the glass doors, the doorman's wide eyes tracking him, and hit the elevator button. The ding sharpened the silence as he rode 20 floors to his penthouse, needing a moment to regroup, to think. The doors slid open and he stepped into his sanctuary, a sprawling space of dark wood and cream leather, the city's skyline twinkling through wall-sized windows like a taunt of peace he couldn't grasp. He kicked off his shoes, soles scorched, and crossed to the kitchen, splashing cold water on his face, droplets trailing down his neck as he gripped the counter, steadying himself. His phone buzzed, Elise's name flashing, but before he could answer, a faint crackle pricked his ears, a sound that didn't belong. He froze, water dripping onto the marble, and sniffed the air, catching a whiff of something sharp, chemical, like paint thinner gone wrong. His eyes darted to the living room, where a thin tendril of smoke curled from under the couch, lazy at first, then thickening fast, a gray snake slithering toward the ceiling. Panic spiked, hot and electric, but he moved, instinct driving him. To the fire extinguisher mounted near the pantry, he yanked it free, ripping the pin, and aimed the nozzle, white foam hissing out to smother the growing flicker beneath the cushions. For a second, he thought he'd caught it, thought he'd won again. But then the windows exploded inward, a deafening crash of glass raining down as a Molotov cocktail sailed through, shattering on the hardwood in a bloom of fire. The room ignited, flames leaping to the curtains, licking up bookshelves, a hungry roar swallowing his world in seconds. Darius dropped the extinguisher, its clang lost in the chaos, and bolted for the door, smoke choking his lungs, heat searing his back. He stumbled into the hall, slamming the fire alarm, its shriek piercing the haze as sprinklers sputtered to life, drenching him in icy bursts. Neighbors spilled out, coughing, shouting, a blur of pajamas and fear, but he kept moving, down the stairwell. 20 flights of concrete steps blurring under his feet, his suit clinging wet and heavy. He hit the lobby just as fire trucks screeched up, red lights flashing like blood pulsing through the night, and firefighters charged past, hoses unspooling. Darius collapsed against a wall, chest heaving, watching flames dance behind his penthouse windows, the life he'd built crumbling into ash. A firefighter, a burly guy with soot-streaked cheeks, grabbed his arm, pulling him clear as the crowd thickened, phones out, filming the blaze like it was a damn movie. "You okay, sir?" the guy asked, voice muffled through his mask. Darius nodded, hoarse. "Yeah," but his eyes locked on the wreckage, his sanctuary now a pyre, and he knew this was no accident. A cop car rolled up, lights spinning, and Officer Powell from the office vandalism stepped out, her face tightening as she clocked Darius in his soaked, singed suit. "Kane," she said, sharp. "What the hell happened?" He straightened, wiping ash from his brow, and pointed to the smoldering lot where his car still smoked. "Started there," he rasped, throat raw. "Then my place. Same people." She frowned, radio crackling as she called for backup, her partner Ortiz jogging over with a notepad already out. "Found this," Ortiz said, holding up a plastic evidence bag. Inside it, a corner of his shredded passport, the blue cover charred but his name still legible, fished from the penthouse debris. Darius stared, a cold fist squeezing his gut. "That's mine," he said, voice low, lethal. "From O'Hare. Karen Voss did this." Powell's eyes flicked to Ortiz, a silent signal, and she nodded. "We're tracing that forum post," she said. "This is arson, attempted murder. We'll get him." Darius clenched his fists, nails digging into palms, and made a vow, silent but ironclad. He'd fight back, tear this hate apart brick by brick. He thought he'd hit bottom, thought the car bomb was the worst they could throw, and now here he was, homeless, hunted but alive. And that was enough to keep going. The crowd pressed closer, whispers buzzing like flies, and a news van screeched to a halt, its antenna stabbing the sky as a reporter leapt out, mic in hand, camera rolling. "Sir," she shouted, a young white woman with a ponytail bouncing. Channel 7, were you in there? What started this? Darius turned, ash clinging to his face, and met her gaze, his voice cutting through the noise, steady despite the wreckage behind him. Someone who hates me for existing, he said, each word a bullet, and they're gonna regret it. She blinked, startled, but the camera kept rolling, catching his silhouette against the flames, a man unbowed in the ruin. Firefighters doused the last flickers, water hissing into steam, and Powell pulled him aside, her tone low. "Stay somewhere safe tonight," she said. "We'll handle this." He nodded, but safe felt like a joke now, a word that didn't fit this war. As the news crew swarmed, framing him as the victim, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in a puddle, eyes burning with a fire hotter than the one he'd escaped. Then a shout from the lot snapped his head around, a bystander pointing at the news van's tires, where another note fluttered, this one fresh, ink still wet. "You're the suspect now." Karen's crew had swung again, and this time, they'd twisted the knife deeper, framing him for his own destruction. The morning sun barely cracked through Chicago's gray haze, casting a weak glow over the smoldering ruins of Darius Kane's penthouse, where smoke still curled from blackened beams, like ghosts refusing to leave. He stood outside the high-rise, his gray suit now a singed, soggy mess clinging to his frame, ash streaking his face as he watched firefighters coil hoses and cops tape off the lot where his sedan's charred skeleton sat. The second note, "You're the suspect now," flapped in Officer Powell's evidence bag, its wet ink a fresh wound, but Darius's eyes burned hotter than the ashes, a quiet fury building as the news van's camera lingered on him, its lens a cold, unblinking eye. By 8 o'clock, the story hit the airwaves, Channel 7 leading the charge with a banner screaming in bold red, "Violent ex-con torches own home after airport clash." The anchor, a slick-haired white guy with a tie too tight, leaned into the mic, voice dripping with fake concern. Darius Kane, seen here fleeing his burning penthouse, allegedly sparked chaos at O'Hare yesterday before this apparent act of arson. Sources say he's a convicted felon with a history of aggression. Lies, every word, but they stuck, plastered across screens in every diner and gym in the city, turning heads and twisting truths. Darius had no record, no convictions. But facts didn't matter when the narrative fit so neat into old ugly grooves. The mastermind behind it was Karen Voss, her venom seeping through the airwaves like poison gas. She'd sat down with a rival station, Channel 9, at 7 that morning, her blonde bob primped and her uniform pressed, crocodile tears glistening as she clutched a tissue. "He threatened my life," she sobbed, voice quivering just enough to sell it, her pale hands trembling for the camera. "At gate C-19 he lunged at me, screamed I'd regret crossing him. I was terrified." The host, a middle-aged white woman with a sympathetic nod, ate it up, patting Karen's arm as the screen flashed that TikTok clip, edited now, cut to show only Darius stepping forward, not her ripping his passport, not her smirk. "A brave flight attendant targeted by a dangerous man," the host cooed. And the lie went national, CNN and Fox picking it up by 9. Headlines morphing, "Heroic worker fights back against thug." "Passport fraud suspect burns home in rage." Darius's phone buzzed nonstop, clients texting, "We're out, Kane." Their contracts with his logistics firm evaporating like mist, his inbox a graveyard of cancellations. He stood in a motel room now, a cheap spot near Midway he'd crashed, at after the fire, watching the TV with fists clenched, the remote creaking in his grip as Karen's face flickered, smug beneath her tears. He couldn't sit still, couldn't let this bury him. By 10, he was at Channel 7 studio downtown, a squat brick building with a neon sign buzzing in the drizzle. Elise had called, urging him to stay low, but Darius wasn't built for hiding. He marched through the lobby, past a startled receptionist with pink nails clacking on a keyboard, and straight to the newsroom, where the ponytail reporter from last night, Jenny, jumped when she saw him. "Mr. Kane," she yelped, mic dropping to her side, her cameraman scrambling to roll. "You can't just—" He cut her off, voice low but thunderous, carrying across the room where producers froze mid-sip of coffee. "You're lying about—" "Me," he said, pulling a USB from his pocket. The gate footage unedited, raw, downloaded from a passenger's Dropbox link that had hit his email overnight. "This shows what really happened at O'Hare. Play it or I sue you into next year." Jenny blinked, mouth flapping, but a producer, a balding guy with a gut spilling over his belt, snatched the USB, muttering, "Let's see it." They plugged it in, and the screen lit up. Karen sneering, tearing his passport. No lunge, no threat, just her venom and his calm. The room went still, pens dropping, breaths held, as the truth played out. Undeniable, brutal. Jenny's face paled, her ponytail sagging as she stammered, We didn't know." Darius stepped closer, towering over her, his voice a blade. "You didn't check. You ran with her story because it fit what you wanted to see." The producer cursed, yanking a headset on, and barked into it. "Cut to live now." Minutes later, Darius stood under studio lights, the anchor beside him sweating as the broadcast flipped. "We've received new evidence," the anchor said, voice cracking, showing Darius Kane was falsely accused by flight attendant Karen Voss. Channel 7 apologizes for the error. The footage rolled again, unedited, and phones lit up. Nationwide tore justice for Darius, spiking back, comments raging, "They tried to ruin him. Fire that liar." Darius walked out, head high, the drizzle cool on his skin, a fleeting rush of triumph pulsing through him. He'd flipped the script, hadn't he? Exposed Karen's tears as a sham, forced the media to eat their words. He ducked into a diner across the street, sipping black coffee, letting the wind settle, thinking maybe, just maybe, he'd turned the corner. But Karen wasn't done, not even close. By noon, she sat in a lawyer's office, a glass-walled suite, overlooking Lake Michigan, her mascara still smudged for effect as she signed papers with a trembling hand. Her uncle, Victor Price, leaned against the desk, a 60-something media mogul with silver hair and a Navy suit that cost more than most people's rent. He owned half the local stations, a kingpin who'd built an empire on spin, and he'd raised Karen like a daughter after her parents bailed. "They can't do this to you, Trish," he said, voice smooth as silk but laced with venom, using her childhood nickname to stoke her fire. "We'll hit back harder." The lawyer, a wiry guy with a comb-over, slid a defamation lawsuit across. The desk, naming Darius, claiming his false accusations, had ruined Karen's career. Victor grinned, shark-like, and dialed a contact at Channel 9, whispering, "Push it tonight." Full smear. By 6, the countersuit hit the wires, headlines flipping again. Flight attendant Suze O'Hare, victim for defamation. Kane's lies, cost hero her job. Victor's cash greased the wheels, amplifying the story, and Darius's motel TV flickered with it as he sat on the lumpy bed, coffee cup cold in his hands. His wind dissolved, replaced by a legal noose tightening around his neck. Karen's smirk reborn through her uncle's power, proving this war wasn't just hers anymore. It was a family affair, and they'd swung with a vengeance he hadn't seen coming. Darius Kane sat in a dimly lit courtroom on the 15th floor of Chicago's Daily Center, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and stale coffee, his gray suit swapped for a borrowed black one from Elise, the only thing he had left that wasn't ash or tatters. The room hummed with tension, a dozen reporters scribbling in the back, their pens scratching like rats in a wall, while the judge, a white man in his 60s with jowls like a bulldog, loomed behind the bench, his black robe swallowing the light. It was 2 days after the penthouse fire, 3 since Karen's defamation suit hit the wires, and now here he was, defendant in a case that twisted his fight into a crime. Across the aisle, Karen Voss perched beside her lawyer, a wiry guy named Kessler with a comb-over and a smirk that matched hers, her blonde bob gleaming under the fluorescence, her eyes dry now. No more fake tears, just a smug glint as she stared at Darius. Her uncle, Victor Price, sat in the front row, silver hair slicked back, his Navy suit crisp, a media mogul radiating power, his presence a silent promise that this wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a guillotine. The charge? Defamation, $5 million in damages, claiming Darius's lies about Karen at O'Hare had tanked her career, her reputation, her life. The truth didn't matter here, money and influence did, and Victor had both in spades. Kessler stood adjusting his tie with a flourish and launched into his opening, voice oily and sharp. "Your Honor, my client, Karen Voss, is a victim," he said, gesturing to her like she was a saint on display. A hard-working woman harassed by Darius Kane, who fabricated a story of racial bias to smear her after she questioned his suspicious passport. He's a violent man. Look at his burned home, his threats, and now he's cost her everything. The judge, Hargreaves, nodded slow, his pen tapping the bench, his eyes flicking to Darius with a skepticism that cut deep. Elise rose next, her red blazer a flare of defiance, her braids tight, her voice steady as she countered. "This is a sham, Your Honor. Mr. Kane's the victim. His passport was destroyed, his life torched, all by Ms. Voss's vendetta. We have proof." She held up the USB, the unedited gate footage, but Hargreaves waved it off, grunting. "Save it for evidence," his tone thick with disinterest. Darius sat still, hands clasped, his jaw tight, watching the room tilt against him, the weight of Victor's shadow pressing down. He knew the fix was in. Victor's golf buddies included half the judges in Cook County, and Hargreaves's country club dues were paid from the same deep pockets that owned Channel 9. The trial rolled. Fast, a greased machine grinding him down. Kessler called witnesses, a gate agent who swore Darius yelled at Karen, a lie so thin it barely held air. A neighbor who claimed he'd seen Darius acting shady before the fire, another fabrication bought with Victor's cash. Elise fought back, showing the TikTok clip, the precinct video of Hargrove's frame-up, but Hargreaves yawned, cutting her off with, "Move it along, counsel." Then came the kicker. Kessler produced a forged bank statement, doctored to show Darius paying off witnesses to lie about Karen, a paper trail so slick it gleamed with Victor's fingerprints. Elise objected, voice rising. "This is fake. Your Honor, we need a forensic audit." But Hargreaves smirked, banging his gavel. "Overruled, I've seen enough." The ruling came down like a hammer. Guilty, $5 million in damages plus court costs, wiping out Darius's savings, his firm teetering on ruin as clients fled the criminal label now plastered across his name. He stood, cuffs of the borrowed suit rubbing raw against his wrists, and met Karen's eyes, her lips curling into a victory sneer as Victor clapped her shoulder, whispering, "Told you we'd win." The reporters swarmed, flashes popping, headlines already writing themselves. Thug loses big in court. Karen Voss vindicated. Darius left the courthouse, rain pelting his face, Elise at his side, her tablet clutched tight as they dodged the press shoving mics in his path. "We'll appeal," she said, fierce, her heels clicking on wet stone. "They rigged it, but I'll find the crack." He nodded, numb, the weight of the loss sinking in, $5 million gone, his reputation shredded, his life a husk after a week of hell. He checked into a new motel, a grimy spot near the Loop, and collapsed on the bed, the springs groaning under him, staring at the cracked ceiling as rain drummed the window. But Elise didn't sleep. She dug, relentless, her laptop glowing in, her office miles away. By midnight, she'd cracked it. A wire transfer buried in Victor's offshore accounts, $10,000 to Hargreaves's cousin, time-stamped a day before the trial. Bribery, hard proof, emailed to her from a whistleblower at Victor's bank, a disgruntled teller sick of the old man's games. She called Darius, voice electric. "We've got him. Meet me at the courthouse now." He bolted up, pulling on the black suit and cabbed it downtown. The city a blur of neon and shadow, hope flickering faint, but real. By dawn, they were back in Hargreaves's chambers, Elise slamming the evidence on his desk, the judge's jowls quivering as he scanned the transfer. "This is nonsense," he blustered, but his voice shook, sweat beading on his brow. Elise leaned in, eyes blazing. "Dismiss the case or this hits the feds by noon." Hargreaves sputtered, red-faced, but he knew he was caught. Victor's money couldn't save him from a paper trail that tight. He scribbled an order, tossing the suit the ruling voided, Darius's savings spared, the gavel banging like a surrender. Darius walked out free again, the rain easing as sunlight broke through, a rare warmth on his skin. He breathed deep, chest loosening, thinking he'd dodged the blade, that Karen and Victor had swung and missed. But as he hailed a cab, his phone buzzed, an unknown number texting a link. Audio, distorted but clear, his voice confessing to the arson. "I burned it all. Had to." A fake so seamless it chilled him. Victor's work, leaked to the press by lunch, Headlines flipping again. Kane admits guilt in shocking audio. The cab rolled on, but Darius's win dissolved, the public's rage turning back on him. Karen's smirk reborn through her uncle's. Next vicious play. All right, you're in deep now. How's this hitting you? Is Darius's courtroom comeback proof he's unbreakable? Or did Victor's bribe just show how rigged this game is? Drop number 1 in the comments if you're cheering Elise's clutch move, or number 2 if you think Victor's too slimy to lose for long. Smash that like button if this legal roller coaster has you hooked, and subscribe if you're ready to see Darius fight this dirty audio twist, because this war's heating up fast. Share this with anyone who's battled a stacked deck, because Darius's story's a wildfire. So what's brewing next? Can he dodge this new smear? Or will the mob come knocking with torches? Darius Kane sat on the edge of a sagging motel bed near Chicago's Loop, the springs creaking under his weight, the borrowed black suit still damp from the morning's rain as he stared at his phone, the screen glowing with that doctored audio. Victor Price had unleashed. His voice, warped but recognizable, looped through the tinny speaker. I burned it all, had to. A lie so crisp it sounded real, now blasting across every news site from NBC to local blogs, the headlines screaming, Kane confesses to arson in leaked tape, fraudster's guilt caught on record. By noon, the motel's cracked TV flickered with pundits tearing him apart, a white guy in a cheap suit nodding gravely. This proves he's dangerous, a menace to society. Darius's chest tightened, his fingers gripping the phone hard, enough to whiten his knuckles, the courtroom wind dissolving into ash faster than his penthouse had burned. Victor's move was genius, ruthless, a digital dagger twisting public rage into a weapon, and it was working. Twitter boiled with the lock-Kane up. Strangers spitting venom. Jail's too good for him. Typical thug. He stood pacing the Y. Room's threadbare carpet, the walls paper-thin, the hum of traffic outside a dull roar. He'd checked in under a fake name, cash only, after Elise warned him to lie low. But low wasn't low enough when hate had his scent. By dusk, the air, outside thickened not with rain but with something uglier. He'd moved to a new hideout, a rundown hotel in South Loop, its neon sign buzzing vacancy and fits, the kind of place where roaches ruled and no one asked questions. He sat by the window, blinds cracked, sipping water from a plastic cup, when a rumble rolled in, low at first, then sharp, a chorus of shouts piercing the evening hush. He peered out, and his gut sank. A mob, maybe 30 strong, spilling down the street, white faces twisted with fury, red hats and hoodies flashing under streetlights. They carried bats, pipes, bottles glinting with amber liquid, and one waved. A printed photo of Darius from the news, his face circled in red marker. "Kane's in there," a voice bellowed, thick with venom, and a brick sailed through the air, smashing the hotel's front window in a spray of glass. The clerk, a wiry, Latino guy, ducked behind the counter, cursing as the mob surged closer, chanting, "Burn him out! Burn him out!" Darius bolted from the chair, heart slamming, grabbing his satchel as a Molotov cocktail arced through the broken window, shattering on the lobby floor in a bloom of fire, flames licking up the peeling wallpaper. Victor's audio had lit this fuse, Karen's hate group fanning it, and now they were here, a lynch mob straight out of history's worst pages, hunting him for crimes he didn't commit. He sprinted for the back, the hall a maze of flickering bulbs and locked doors, smoke trailing him as shouts echoed louder, boots stomping the pavement outside. "Get him!" a woman shrieked, her voice shrill, and glass crunched as more bottles flew, fire spreading fast, the hotel's cheap frame groaning under the heat. Darius hit the fire escape, a rusted ladder bolted to the alley wall and climbed, his borrowed suit snagging on jagged metal, the night air cold against his sweat-soaked skin. He dropped to the ground, landing hard on wet concrete, his ankle twisting but holding as he ducked behind a dumpster, its stink of rotting trash a shield against the chaos. The mob swarmed the front, shadows dancing in the firelight, bats swinging at air, pipes clanging on railings, their rage a living thing, blind and feral. He peeked out, counting heads, spotting a bald guy with a swastika tattoo barking orders. "Check the back." Darius's breath hitched, his mind racing. Run or fight, no in between, but running won when he saw the bald guy light another Molotov, the flame glinting off his sneer. He bolted down the alley, legs pumping, the roar of the blaze swallowing. His footsteps, weaving through trash cans and puddles until he hit a side street, lungs burning. The mob's cries fading but not gone. Sirens wailed, sharp and close, cutting through the night as red and blue lights flashed around the corner. 2 cop cars screeched up, tires skidding, and officers leapt out, black and white faces under helmets shouting, "Drop your weapons!" The mob scattered, some swinging wild, others bolting as batons cracked skulls and cuffs snapped wrists. Darius crouched behind a parked van, watching Powell, her from the penthouse fire, haul the bald guy down, her knee in his back, his tattooed arm pinned. "You're done," she growled, and Ortiz cuffed another, a skinny kid clutching a broken bottle, his bravado melting into sobs. The fire truck rolled in, hoses blasting, dousing the hotel's front as flames hissed into steam, the mob's chaos crumbling under the law's weight. Darius exhaled, slow and ragged, his ankle throbbing, thinking he'd dodged the noose again, that the cops had saved him this time. He stood, limping toward Powell, ready to explain, when tires squealed again. Victor's doing, no doubt. The bald guy and 3 others, bailed out within an hour, slipped free on a technicality. A slick lawyer in a gray suit flashing cash at the precinct door. Darius froze, spotting them across the street, eyes locking on him, bat still in hand, now joined by a new face, a wiry guy with a pistol tucked in his waistband, glinting under a street lamp. They didn't charge, not yet, just trailed him, slow and deliberate, as he hobbled through South Loop's shadows, the city's pulse a dull thud in his ears. He ducked into another alley, breath shallow, the borrowed suit sticking to his skin, his satchel banging his hip. The mob was smaller now but deadlier, their footsteps a steady drumbeat behind him, closing in. He turned a corner and a shot rang out. A crack splitting the night, the bullet grazing his shoulder, ripping through fabric and flesh, a hot sting that dropped him to one knee. Blood seeped warm down his arm, staining the black suit red, and he pressed a hand to it, wincing, scrambling behind a stack of crates as the wiry guy laughed, a high, cruel sound. "Run all you want, Kane," he called, voice echoing off brick. "We'll find you." Darius gritted his teeth, pain searing, but he crawled, low and fast, adrenaline drowning the hurt, slipping through a gap to a side lot where headlights flared, a cab idling, its driver oblivious. He dove in, slamming the door, gasping, "Drive! Now!" The cab peeled out, tires spinning, leaving the mob in the dust, their shouts fading as blood pooled on the seat, his vision blurring but holding. He'd escaped, barely, a win snatched from death's jaws, but those guns meant Karen's. Hate had teeth now, and they were sharpening for the next bite. Darius Kane slumped in the back of the cab, blood seeping from the graze on his shoulder, staining the borrowed black suit a slick, dark red, as the driver gunned it through Chicago's South Loop, streetlights smearing into streaks outside the fogged-up window. Pain throbbed hot and sharp, a pulsing reminder of the mob's bullet. But his jaw stayed locked, his breath steady, his mind racing faster than the tires humming on wet asphalt. The cab swerved onto a quieter street, away from the alley where those bats and guns had hunted him, and he pressed his palm harder against the wound, wincing as the sting bit deeper, the fabric sticking to his skin. "You okay, man?" The driver, a grizzled black guy with a gray cap, asked, eyes flicking to the rear view, concern creasing his brow. "Fine," Darius rasped, voice rough but firm. "Just get me to Wicker Park, fast." The driver nodded, no questions, and floored. The engine growling as they cut through the city's veins, leaving the mob's echoes behind. Darius leaned back, blood dripping onto the cracked vinyl seat, and pulled his phone from his satchel, the screen cracked but glowing. He dialed Elise, her voice crackling through after one ring. "Darius, where are you?" "Shot," he said, low and clipped. "Shoulder. Mob hit the hotel. I'm heading to a safe spot. Need you to dig." She didn't flinch, just said, "On it. Stay alive." The line clicked dead and he exhaled, the cab's heat fogging his breath, knowing this wasn't surrender, it was reload. He crashed at a friend's loft in Wicker Park, a brick-walled hideout owned by Jamal, a lean ex-boxer who'd known Darius since their teens, his dreads tied back, his eyes narrowing at the blood as he opened the door. "Damn, bruh," Jamal, muttered, hauling him in. "You look like war." Darius collapsed on a couch, peeling off the ruined jacket, the graze a jagged slash across his shoulder, raw but shallow, no bullet lodged, just flesh torn. Jamal grabbed a first aid kit, stitching him up with steady hands, antiseptic stinging like fire as gauze taped tight. "Who's got you like this?" Jamal asked, tossing bloody rags in a bin. "Karen Voss," Darius said, voice a growl, "and her uncle Victor Price. They're burning my life down." Jamal whistled low, shaking his head. But Darius wasn't here to vent, he was here to fight. He booted up Jamal's laptop, fingers flying, digging into Victor's empire, a media titan with dirty hands. Hours bled into dawn, coffee cooling beside him until he struck gold. Financial records, leaked from a dark web forum, showing Victor funneling cash to pure patriots, the same hate group Karen had sicked on him. Tax filings proving he'd bankrolled their rallies, their weapons, their firebombs. Evidence hard and cold enough to gut him. By sunrise, Darius emailed it to a whistleblower site. Truth uncovered. A rogue outfit known for blowing lids off corruption. His message short. Victor Price funds hate. Expose him. Within an hour, the site posted it. Raw documents. Splashed across their homepage, Twitter erupting with Rajtakar Victor exposed, screenshots spreading like wildfire. Media mogul backs racists. Price's millions armed thugs. Darius watched from the loft, shoulder throbbing under the bandage, a grim satisfaction curling his lips as the feds moved fast. A black SUV rolling up to Victor's Gold Coast mansion by noon, agents and windbreakers, storming the marble steps, cuffing him as cameras flashed. CNN cut in live, a blonde reporter breathless. Victor Price, media tycoon, arrested for financing hate crimes tied to attacks on Darius Kane. His silver hair glinted as he ducked into the van, face twisted in fury, his empire cracking under the weight of Darius's strike. Clients called back, timid apologies trickling in, his logistics firm teetering but not dead. He leaned back, sipping water Jamal handed him, the loft's quiet a stark contrast to the chaos he'd unleashed, thinking he'd landed the knockout, that Victor's fall would drag Karen down too, that he'd finally turned this war his way. But Karen Voss wasn't in that mansion, wasn't sweating in cuffs. She sat in a dingy motel room across town, her uniform swapped for a hoodie, her blonde bob hidden under a baseball cap, her fingers trembling not from fear, but from rage as she watched Victor's arrest on a flickering TV. Her career was ash, her name poison after Darius's footage, but spite kept her burning, a coal glowing hotter with every loss. She'd hacked before, petty stuff, stealing ex's emails, but this was bigger. She cracked open a laptop, cheap and untraceable, bought with cash from a pawn shop, and dug into Darius's life, her skills rusty but sharp enough. By dusk, she'd breached his bank accounts, a backdoor from an old firm login he'd never changed, and drained them, 200 grand siphoned to a dummy account, every penny he'd clawed back from the lawsuit gone in a blink. Then she pushed, deeper, planting a forged Interpol alert, flagging him as a fugitive tied to international fraud, her fingers stabbing keys with a vicious glee as she hit send, the alert pinging global systems. She leaned back, cap shadowing her smirk, muttering, "Checkmate, Kane," as the TV droned on about Victor, oblivious to her play. Darius didn't feel it yet, not as he sat in Jamal's loft, the city's skyline a jagged silhouette through the window, his shoulders stiff but bearable, the feds raid replaying on mute. His phone buzzed, a client texting, "We're back in, man, sorry for the scare," and he let a rare breath of relief slip out, thinking the tide had turned, that Victor's cuffs were the endgame. Then his bank app pinged, a red alert flashing. Account balance, 0.00 euros. He froze, thumbs swiping, heart slamming as the screen confirmed it. Empty, every dollar sucked dry, transactions he'd never made glaring back. Transfer to unknown, 6:47 p.m. Before he could call Elise, another buzz hit, a text from an unknown number. "Interpol's coming, fugitive, run." He stood, pain flaring in his shoulder, the loft's walls closing in as Jamal turned, brow furrowing. "What's up?" Darius didn't answer, just grabbed his satchel, blood pounding in his ears, the wind evaporating into a new nightmare. Karen had struck back, silent and savage, turning him into a ghost with no money, no name, hunted worldwide, her revenge a blade he hadn't seen until it was buried in his back. Darius Kane stood in Jamal's Wicker Park loft, the cracked phone trembling in his hand as the Interpol alert glared back. Fugitive, Darius Kane, international fraud. A digital noose Karen Voss had slipped around his neck, tightening with every buzz of his empty bank app. Blood still seeped through the bandage on his shoulder, a dull ache pulsing under the borrowed black suit, now stiff with dried sweat and grime. But his eyes burned, sharp and unyielding, as he paced the brick-walled room, the city's hum a faint pulse beyond the window. Jamal watched from the couch, dreads loose, his voice low. "They're hunting you worldwide, bruh. What's the move?" Darius stopped, breath steadying, and pulled a slim leather wallet from his satchel, flipping it open to reveal a silver-embossed card. Darius Kane, Chairman, Horizon Airlines Group. Jamal's jaw dropped, eyes wide. "You own an airline? For real?" Darius nodded, slow, the weight of it settling in. "Built it quiet from the ground up. Logistics was the cover. Time to play it." He'd kept it buried, a secret weapon forged over 15 years, but Karen's hack had stripped him bare. Nothing left to lose, everything to gain. He dialed Elise, voice clipped. "Meet me at O'Hare Executive Lounge. Bring the board." She didn't ask why, just said, 2 hours, and hung up. The line dead as he grabbed his satchel, limping out into the dawn, the game about to flip. The cab ride back to O'Hare was a blur, Chicago's skyline fading into a gray smear. As pain gnawed his shoulder, blood spotting the seat, the driver's nervous glances ignored. He stepped into the terminal, the same chaotic sprawl where this war had ignited, his suit a wreck, his stride uneven but unbroken, weaving past travelers who didn't know the storm he carried. Security eyed him, hands twitching near radios, the Interpol alert likely pinging their screens. But he flashed the Horizon ID, its silver gleam parting them like a blade through water. He hit the executive lounge, a hushed oasis of leather and glass tucked above gate C19, the irony thick as he glanced down at the spot where Karen had shredded his passport days ago. Elise waited, red blazer crisp, tablet glowing, flanked by 5 board members in tailored suits, their faces a mix of confusion and steel. Horizon's inner circle, summoned from Seattle on a private jet he'd ordered mid-flight a week back, before the world caught fire. "Darius," Elise said sharp, "what's this?" He tossed the ID on the table, its thud a gunshot in the quiet. "I'm the chairman, been running it silent. Time they know." The board stirred, murmurs rippling, but a woman with gray streaks in her hair, CFO Linda Hayes, nodded slow. "We've got your back, Kane. Always have." Elise didn't waste time, pulling strings with a federal contact. The Interpol alert flagged as fraud within an hour. Karen's hack unraveling under scrutiny, her dummy account traced to a sloppy IP slip. Darius stood at the lounge's glass wall, watching planes taxi, when the board convened a press call. Live-streamed from the lounge, cameras rolling as Linda stepped up, voice clear. "Horizon Airlines confirms Darius Kane as our founder and chairman, a visionary targeted by a vicious smear campaign. Karen Voss, a former employee, acted alone in her hate. She's terminated, effective immediately." The room erupted, reporters shouting, passengers below craning necks, phones out, the feed spiking online. Horizon reveal. Kane fights back. Darius turned, shoulder stiff, and saw Karen herself, dragged in by security, her hoodie swapped back for that Navy uniform, her blonde, bob limp, her face pale as they hauled her from the gate she'd ruled. She'd come to gloat, to see him cuffed, but now she trembled. Victor's arrest leaving her naked, her job gone, her lies exposed. The lounge doors swung open, Powell and Ortiz storming in, cuffs gleaming as they grabbed her wrists. Powell's voice cutting through. "Karen Voss, you're under arrest for cybercrime, arson conspiracy, and attempted murder." She twisted, shrieking, "He ruined me." But they yanked her out, her screams fading down the hall, passengers cheering, a raw, ragged roar that shook the glass. Darius faced Victor next. The old man bailed out that morning, swaggering into the lounge with a lawyer in tow, his silver hair glinting, his navy suit pressed, thinking cash could still bend this. "You're nothing, Kane," Victor spat, voice smooth but venomous, stepping close, his cologne sharp. "This airline? A fluke. I'll bury you yet. Say you bought it with dirty money." Darius didn't flinch, just leaned in, voice low, lethal. "Try it." Linda cut in, tablet raised, showing feds cuffing Victor's accountant live on CNN, ledgers spilling his fraud, decades of cooked books, not Darius's. Victor's smirk died, his lawyer blanching as agents burst through the doors, windbreakers rustling, cuffs snapping on the mogul's wrists again. "Victor Price, you're under arrest for financial fraud, hate group funding," an agent barked, dragging him out, his roar of "This isn't over" echoing hollow as the lounge doors slammed shut. Darius stood tall, blood crusted on his sleeve, the board clapping, passengers below chanting his name, a tide of triumph washing over him. He'd flipped the board, toppled the king and queen, his ownership a blazing truth that burned their lies to dust. He sank into a leather chair, exhaling, the pain a dull hum now, thinking he'd won, finally, fully. The war ended with him standing in the wreckage, king of his own empire. But then, as he sipped water, the lounge's calm shattered. A red dot flickered on his chest, small, steady, a laser's kiss dancing over his heart through the glass wall. He froze, breath catching, eyes darting to the terminal below, where a figure slipped through the crowd, too fast to clock, a rifle's barrel glinting in a shadow beyond the gate. The board gasped, Elise lunging. "Get down!" But Darius stayed still, staring at that dot, a sniper's promise cutting through his victory, a final card played by an unseen hand. The dot vanished, then reappeared, teasing. A heartbeats, pause, and he knew this wasn't Victor, not Karen, not yet over. Someone else, something darker, had picked up their torch, and the war he'd thought he'd won was just reloading with a deadlier aim. Darius Kane stood in the executive lounge at O'Hare, the leather chair creaking under his weight, his borrowed black suit stiff with dried blood and sweat as the red dot of a sniper's laser danced across his chest, a fleeting ghost that vanished, then flickered back, teasing death through the glass wall. The board members froze, breath held, Elise's shout, "Get down!" still ringing in the air, but Darius didn't move, his eyes locked on the terminal below, scanning the crowd for that glint of steel he'd glimpsed moments ago. The lounge's plush silence clashed with the chaos beyond, passengers still. Buzzing from his reveal as Horizon's chairman, their cheers a distant hum against the pounding in his ears. His shoulder throbbed, the graze from the mob's bullet a dull fire under the bandage. But he stayed upright, defiant, the weight of his victory. Karen cuffed, Victor hauled off, now a fragile shield against this new shadow. Linda Hayes, the CFO, grabbed his arm, tugging, her gray-streaked hair wild, voice sharp. "Darius, move!" He shook her off, slow, deliberate, his gaze fixed on Gate C-19, where this war had sparked, where Karen's hate had birthed a monster that wouldn't die. Then he saw her, Rosa Alvarez, the elderly Latina woman he'd helped days ago, her wheelchair parked near the gate, her floral bag balanced on her lap, her frail frame hunched but alive, a quiet anchor in the storm he'd forgotten until now. The dot vanished again and he exhaled, a ragged breath, thinking it was a bluff, a taunt from some last gasp of Victor's crew. But then a crack split the air, sharp and final, a gunshot echoing through the terminal like a thunderclap. Glass shattered somewhere below, screams erupting, and Darius lunged to the window, heart slamming, only to see Rosa jerk in her chair, a bloom of red spreading across her chest, her scarf fluttering as she slumped forward. The bullet hadn't hit him. It had found her, tearing through the woman who'd blessed him, who'd seen him when no one else had. He roared, a raw, guttural sound, and bolted for the stairs, shoving past board members, Elise's cries lost. In the rush as he sprinted down, 2 steps at a time, his wounded shoulder screaming with every jolt. The terminal was chaos, travelers scattering, security shouting, But he zeroed in on Rosa. Her wheelchair tipped against a luggage cart she'd rolled in front of him, a shield he hadn't asked for. He dropped to his knees beside her, blood soaking the tile, her cloudy eyes fluttering as she gripped his hand, weak but fierce. "You're enough," she whispered, voice a thread, her breath fading as her fingers slipped from his, her body still, the light gone. Darius cradled her, ash and blood smearing his face, a howl trapped in his throat as medics rushed in, too late, their hands pulling him back as her cart rolled away, empty. He staggered to his feet, vision blurring, the terminal a swirl of sirens and shouts, security swarming. But his eyes caught a figure slipping through the crowd. A lean man, late 20s, white, with a buzz cut and a black jacket, the rifle's barrel vanishing under his coat as he melted into the exodus. Darius lunged, shoving past a guard, but the shooter was gone, a ghost in the chaos, leaving only Rosa's blood on his hands. Powell and Ortiz barreled in, badges flashing, Powell's face hardening as she saw the body, Ortiz barking into his radio. "Shoot her loose, lock it down!" Darius turned to them, voice breaking but steel beneath it. "He's Victor's," he said, pointing to the gate. "His son, I'd bet." Powell frowned, kneeling by Rosa, her gloved hand lifting a spent casing, her eyes meeting his. "We'll find him," she said, firm, but Darius shook his head, the pieces snapping into place. Victor had a kid, a rumor he'd heard years back, a boy raised on the same hate, hidden from the Empire's spotlight, but schooled in its venom. The sniper wasn't random, wasn't hired muscle, it was family, a legacy of rage picking up where Victor's cuffs left off and Rosa had paid the price, her sacrifice a gut punch that turned Darius's win to ash. Elise reached him, breathless, her red blazer stark against the blood-streaked floor, grabbing his arm as medics zipped Rosa into a bag, the sound a knife in his gut. "Darius," she said, low, urgent. "You're not safe. We need to go." He pulled free, staring at Rosa's cart, its wheels still, her floral bag toppled, a rosary spilling out, beads glinting in the chaos. "No," he said, voice a growl. "I'm done running." He turned to the crowd, passengers gaping, phones rolling, and raised his chin, blood and ash painting him a warrior, not a victim. "This ends when the system does," he said, loud. Enough to carry, a vow etched in every syllable. Powell nodded, Ortiz jotting notes, but Darius knew cops alone wouldn't stop this, not Victor's son, not the hate that birthed him. He walked out, past the medics, past the tape, into the night, the terminal's lights fading as sirens wailed, a king unbroken but scarred. Rosa's words, "You're enough," a torch in his chest. The shooter's voice rang in his memory, "We'll find you," a promise now reversed because Darius wasn't hiding anymore. He was hunting, dismantling this beast from the roots, his empire a weapon to wield, not just defend. The city swallowed him, shadows stretching long as he moved, shoulders stiff, blood crusted, every step a drumbeat of purpose. Rosa's death wasn't the end, wasn't defeat. It was fuel, a spark igniting a crusade bigger than revenge, bigger than Horizon. He'd build it back, not just for him, but for her, for every soul crushed under the same hate that took her, a system that let Karen tear a passport and Victor fund a mob, that let a sniper pull a trigger because a black man dared to rise. He vanished into the dark, a silhouette against Chicago's glow. The war not over but reborn, his fight now a fire that wouldn't fade, a promise to tear it all down and start again. Rosa's blood the ink on his oath. This gripping tale of Darius Kane delivers raw lessons about resilience, systemic hate, and the power of truth. First, it shows that racism isn't just loud slurs or fists. It's quiet sabotage, like Karen shredding a passport, or Victor rigging courts, a web woven into everyday systems. Darius faced relentless attacks from firebombs to fake audio, yet he stood tall, proving that strength isn't just surviving, but striking back with cunning and grit. His ownership of Horizon Airlines wasn't a trophy. It was a sword, a reminder that building something enduring can outlast the loudest lies. Second, Rosa's sacrifice screams a brutal truth. Innocence often pays the price for hate's war, her death a mirror to countless unseen victims. Her final words, You're enough. Teach us that worth isn't tied to what others see, but what we fight for. Third, the story exposes how media and power twist narratives. Victor's smear turned Darius into a villain overnight, showing how fast truth can drown in noise. Yet, his counterstrike with evidence flipped the game, underlining that facts wielded right can shatter empires. Finally, the sniper, Victor's son, warns that hate doesn't die easy. It breeds, shifts, and reloads. Darius's vow to dismantle it roots deep. Change isn't a win, it's a war. What's the takeaway? Stand up, dig in, and fight smart. Because justice isn't handed out, it's carved. So what hit you hardest, Rose's loss or Darius's fire? Comment below if her sacrifice broke you, or like and subscribe if his comeback lit you up. Share this with anyone battling their own Karens, because these stories matter. Thanks for riding this wild ride with us. Here's to courage that burns, brighter than the flames, and may you find your own strength to rise.